Free is the president's corruption. Corruption is the use of public office and public power for private personal gain. And that's what the president very clearly did here. And it's why he's being impeached. But here's the thing. It's not just this one little Ukraine thing. It's a recurring practice of the president. We just found out this week that in the first 5 months of his presidency, back in 2017, Donald Trump had the Secret Service paying his properties more than $250,000. That's 5 months. Just last month, remember, he tried to award himself a multi-million-dollar government contract by bringing the G7 to one of his support resorts, Miami in July. If you're going to talk about Donald Trump's corruption, it just suffuses everything about his presidency. So joining me now to talk about that is a woman who literally wrote a book about corruption in America and how much the founders hated it, Zephyr Teachout. Hey, how are you?
Good, how are you?
So maybe let's just start with the concept of corruption, like how you think about it and how central you think about it to being to the Constitution, the founders' concerns, the strength of American democracy.
Yeah, corruption is when somebody who has been given the really sacred power to use public power to act for the people, then takes that and uses it for their own selfish, private gain. And this concern, the fear of corruption was actually really central to the founding of our country. After we had decided that we were going to try to be a United States, the next question was, how do we construct a country that protects against corruption? At the Constitutional Convention, so imagine you're in that hot summer in Philadelphia, the framers talked about corruption a quarter of the time.
Wow.
They got to wring everything through the ringer, like the treaty power, the size of districts, the electoral college, everything they debated in terms of how can we protect against corruption? Because what they said and understood is that the danger of republics is that, and their potential weakness is that they could become corrupted. And so they were less afraid of external threats and more afraid of internal threats of corruption.
They're particularly afraid. There's a quote from George Mason during the Constitutional Convention, which you pointed out to me. I shouldn't be like, oh, I just found this quote. Who said this? Shall the man who has practiced corruption and by that means procured his appointment in the first instance be suffered to escape punishment by repeating his guilt? So it's not just the corruption they're worried about. It's if you get corrupt enough that you can corrupt the electoral process to get yourself into power again.
Exactly. So that Mason quote comes in the middle of this very vibrant debate about impeachment. Initially, in the early drafts, there was a provision for impeachment for malpractice or neglect of duty. But Mason and others were so worried about corruption. They said, no, we have to make sure that we're really clear that we can have impeachment for bribery and treason. And then he had a general phrase about maladministration, and Madison said, let's clean that up.
Right. And I think it's interesting, too. They take maladministration out specifically because they think it's too broad and it's not specific to this idea of corruption. It's just like if you're incompetent, if you're bad at your job, that's actually not enough to their view. Like they actually make the decision to take that out.
And they replace it with high crimes and misdemeanors, which had a very precise meaning in the English tradition. And the three big proponents of the impeachment power were Randolph and Mason and Madison, and all of them not only talked about corruption, but talked particularly about foreign corruption and about the unique dangers of an executive having extraordinary powers in the foreign realm. Randolph was really worried about the executive becoming corrupt in questions of war and peace. Because people wouldn't necessarily know about it. It's the peak of presidential power.
Right.
So they were concerned about it, and there were a few people who objected that said, no, we shouldn't have this impeachment clause. In fact, Charles Pinckney said, don't worry, if there is another election, that is all you need.
This literally the argument they're making. I mean, literally the argument.
The same argument.
And what's the response to that?
Well, the overwhelming response, the overwhelming majority of states and delegates said, no, we actually need this because this is the threat of corruption and foreign corruption is so grave, and it can do so much to our country to have somebody continuing in office when they are serving their own private, selfish ends at the expense of the public, especially in foreign affairs, but in all affairs, that we can't actually wait for that. We need to have the impeachment clause.
A lot of this is related in this book, Corruption in America, which is a great book I recommend to everyone. You and I discussed it in an episode we did of my podcast, Why Is This Happening, which you can download if you want to hear more about this effort. Teach Out. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.